You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 355 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer. I'll be your host, and I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin, and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
Well, I'm in attendance for this podcast, so that's something, but it's been a rough day for the Cubs, that is.
It's been a rough day for the Cubs for sure. We are recording on a Monday night ahead of the trade deadline. We're not waiting. We're going to talk about the moves they made. We're going to assume any other move they make, we can talk about next week. If they do something blockbuster, we will bust in with an emergency podcast if need be later this week.
Don't hold your breath on that one.
But we're this sure that we're safe in podcasting tonight that we're going to go ahead and do our show, and to help us unpack all of the news of the week, helping us preview the upcoming week that will be and all things trade deadline. You know him from his work at CubsInsider.com and, of course, his many appearances here on this podcast. Please welcome back friend of the show, longtime friend of the show, Evan Altman. Evan, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
No problem. I'm very excited, to talk about this team that just can't figure out what the hell to do from one game to another. It's great, tremendous fun to watch. So might as well talk about it and just rake ourselves over the coals repeatedly. It's fun.
Well, since last we podcasted, the Cubs lost 2 of 3 to Milwaukee. And then won 2 out of 3 in Kansas City against a not-so-bad Kansas City team. But, man, it was the discussion is all about, were the Cubs going to sell? Who were they going to sell? Or after this week, were they going to talk themselves into buying? Or were they just going to stand pat and pick around the edges as we predicted on last week's podcast? Or
only the Cubs could look at a 3-3 week and think that's the time to strike while the iron's hot. Buy. Yeah.
Yes, and they did make some moves, and those moves were in line with what Jed Hoyer said was going to be the strategy of getting players not for this season, but players that can help the team beyond this 2024 season. They started by acquiring Nate Pearson from Toronto. Let's start with that before we get to the big trade here. Pat, we'll start with you on this one. Nate Pearson for the Cubs' number 23 and 29 prospect, Josh Rivera and Johandrick Pinago going the other way.
So Nate Pearson is a former first-round draft pick. He will soon be 28 years old. Reminds me a little, having not seen him or watched him pitch, this is probably an unfair comparison, but statistically he reminds me a little bit of Dylan Maples in that he strikes out lots of people. But he also he started off his career with kind of a Tyler Chatwood issue where he was walking tremendous numbers of batters. Like I think he was walking like 7 batters per 9 innings. I mean, pretty bad. And he's gotten that under control the last couple of years a little bit, but in return, he's also started giving up a lot of hits. So he's giving up over 10 hits per 9 innings now. His ERA is not anything to write home about in the sense that it's in the 5s, and it was 4.85 last year. His FIP's a little bit lower. But, he's one of these guys who I think they view as having some upside. It's going to be the kind of upside that's going to have to develop in the next 24 months because he's 28 years old, basically. And, you got to figure it out at some point. But they really like his fastball. They like his stuff. Lively arm, I think, is the term they use. And, it's kind of a flyer. I think it does speak to the fact that the Cubs have, and we talked about this a little bit off air before any of these trades are made this week. The Cubs are in this interesting situation where while they have one of the top rated farm systems in baseball, it's not like a top heavy star laden farm system. It's a very deep farm system. But sometimes you run into problems with deep farm systems where there's nowhere to put everybody. They just had another draft and they're going to have some international free agent signings. And so at some point you need to unload some of those guys. So I think that's sort of what was going on here. They unloaded two guys who may, if things work out, be kind of fringy major league players or may never touch the majors, frankly, for a guy who they think has more upside. And if they can straighten him out and maybe work on some of his pitch selection and maybe some other things in his delivery, they think that they can get, kind of a bigger bang for the buck on. So I assume that's what they're doing here. So it's one of those things it's not like I don't hate the move. I just, it's sort of kind of see what happens kind of deal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty fair, right? I mean, I guess it still very much fits the Jed Hoyer mold, right? I mean, it is a multi-year reliever, not that they went out and signed somebody, but to go get somebody who, it's hard to say he provides any certainty, but they do. And it's kind of, I would almost look at this like a Julian Merriweather, who they also got from the Blue Jays, who kind of gave up on him. Hard thrower, a lot of strikeouts, a lot of walks in there too. And looking at, hey, is there some kind of an unlock we can figure out with our own pitching development, which, for whatever reason, the Cubs seem to do a much, much better job of finding these kind of retread or, second chance guys in the bullpen than they do with developing their own pitchers internally. So I don't really know what the deal is there, but they've done, I mean, because look at, and it's, some of them are even their own guys who they got back, like Tyson Miller. All of a sudden, he's been a really solid, Jorge Lopez, been pretty solid for him since they picked him up. Merriweather, another one, obviously hurt, but,
You spend 1 week in the Cubs bullpen, and you are guaranteed to either be a reclamation project for the Cubs, or you will soon be released and become a reclamation project for somebody else, but you will have success in the major leagues.
Look at Jason Adam. Look what happened with that guy.
Estrada, Adam, you name it. I mean, it's crazy the number of pitchers who the Cubs have either David Robertson, who they've either turned around themselves or who have had this great success after leaving the Cubs, but the Cubs just kind of intuitively know who to get.
They do a great job with the bullpen reclamation projects for sure. Hopefully this is another one of those. I don't know anything about the players going the other way. So it's one of those, you mentioned it at the top, Pat. This is a deep farm system. This is what you need to do with a deep farm system is try to weaponize these to get players that you're targeting and try to go out and get those guys. So bullpen help. It'll be interesting to see how the Cubs see if they're able to fix him. Putting him through the pitch lab, we'll see. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, that's about all. I mean, it is kind of the only thing. And this is my biggest problem with this whole deal, though. Too, is and we've obviously beaten this to death on a number of different fronts, but it's like. They have done so well in general. Not all of them work, but they've done a really good job with these kind of reclamation guys that I think they're so comfortable in that it causes them not to go out and spend real money on actual certainty, right? Because why do that? Why go pay all this extra money? And it's like, why buy the brand name when we can just go get the generic, and that kind of a thing. And that concerns me again, but maybe they'll hit really big, but that's kind of the issue, is that there's a limited upside. Like, these guys can be pretty good, but you're not going to suddenly turn Nate Pearson into some lights out closer.
No,
and it's just, and this is what they'll keep doing. But it's one of those deals where it's interesting enough to kind of make you cock your head a little bit, but not so much so that you're looking at it going like, oh yeah, they're definitely, boy, they're pushing in, even if it's not for next year, or for this year. Oh man, 25, they're looking great. Nate Pearson, got him now. Ooh, boy, we're looking amazing for 25. Like, it's not even that. It's just kind of like, all right, you cleared out a couple guys from the organization. You made some space for the prospects to come in that you just drafted. That's probably the biggest thing organizationally that they're looking at.
And I think one of the downsides of signing a large number of flyers is that we've seen over the last 2 seasons now, sometimes it takes a couple months in order to figure out who's who and what's going to gel or not gel. And the Cubs have really gotten burned both in 2023 and 2024 with how the bullpen performed in April and May. They seem to have kind of righted the ship a little bit, but with a lot of different people than they started the season with for a variety of reasons, and injuries and other things. But, not having that kind of consistent go-to, gosh, how long has it been since they've had somebody who you're like, oh, that's our closer. And you've said that like for more than like 2 seasons in a row, like somebody who's actually, I grew up as a child with the Bruce Sutter, Lee Smith years, right? So the Cubs had a closer for like a dozen years, just one of 2 people, the whole time. And now it seems that that changes almost week to week, if not month to month.
Well, the big news was the trade that happened over the weekend as the Cubs made a trade with the Tampa Bay Rays. And whenever I'm hearing that the Cubs are making a trade with the Tampa Rays, I'm nervous because I'm always nervous that Tampa knows more about your farm system than you do. And so when I'm always like, who are we giving up here? Because it's usually there's a potential they could be really big. So here the Cubs traded Christopher Morel in a shock, I think, to a lot of Cubs fans. Christopher Morel on the way out. They're upgrading third base by bringing in Isaac Paredes. This is an upgrade over Christopher Morel. So how they balanced out the trade is by also including reliever Hunter Biggie, who we've seen a few times in the past week or so, and pitching prospect Ty Johnson as well, heading to Tampa Bay. This is quite an upgrade. Evan, first of all, I'm sure you were as surprised as everybody that that Morel was on the way out, but when we stopped and thought about it, this move makes a ton of sense.
It does, and interestingly enough, as we're after I watched Nate Pearson strike somebody out on a 97-mile-an-hour painted fastball, he just gave up a home run to Jamer Candelario in a nice little turn of events. So this is the second deadline in a row in which the Cubs have reacquired a former third base prospect who they traded to the Tigers at the deadline in 2017, famously for Alex Avila and Justin Wilson.
Yeah,
a historically bad trade, by the way.
Oh yeah, that was awful. Like, speaking of guys that the Cubs broke, right? Like, that was not a reclamation because Wilson was supposed to be this stud lefty. He's going to be the man, and the Cubs broke him completely. Yep. After that trade, he's bounced around. He's found, I think, a modicum of success here and there, but just completely awful. And the fact that so you traded them away, you got Dick in return, and now you had to go back, and they have since had to trade legitimate prospects in the system to reacquire these guys. But at least with Paredes, I can't even pronounce his name very well. So, but I will refer to him as Isaac. So maybe I'll get that right. But no, it's what's interesting is he and Morel were in the same international free agency class as well. So there's this whole circular thing. I'm not as sold on this being a big upgrade though, as what I think a lot of people are, simply because Paredes worries me a little bit in terms of the batted ball profile. He's been able to exceed that. He's got terrible exit velocity numbers. His bat speed is really slow, and he is a dead pull hitter. I think 1 or 2 of his home runs this season have even gone to left center. They are all hard left. That plays really well at Tropicana, right? Because his expected home runs are actually a little bit higher there. His expected home runs at Wrigley, I think, are only 11 when you look at kind of how those numbers play. And it concerns me, speaking of trades with the Tigers, in the opposite way that I was really bullish on the Nick Castellanos trade, because Castellanos was stuck hitting a lot of doubles in Comerica that then were converted into home runs in Wrigley and other places in the NL Central. So I'm a little bit worried. But that said, I do think it raises the floor, certainly, because even if some of those home runs are turning into singles or doubles or whatever, the glove is much better than what Morel was showing at third.
Yep.
The chase rate is way lower. So his overall plate approach, he walks at a near elite level. He strikes out at a near elite level on the right side, right? He's like under 17% and close to, I think, a 13% walk rate, somewhere in that neighborhood. Has gotten some improvement there. And again, when you look at him he's not a Gold Glover, but he's like at 0 or 1 on outs above average and defensive runs saved, whereas Morel was like the worst defensive third baseman, possibly the worst defensive player statistically in baseball, like period, any position. So I think when you look at those things, then you look at how it solidifies third base, where they still gave Morel way, way too much rope, I think, out there than what they should have. It seemed like one of those things where they were like, we'll see, and then they never really committed to it, and it didn't work. My bigger question, and then I promise I'll stop rambling, is that now that third is officially locked up, you've got Matt Shaw, you've got James Triantos coming up through the system. Their only real spots at this point then are second base, because Matt Bush is at first, Michael Bush. I don't know why I keep calling him Matt Bush, Michael Bush. And you've got Dansby Swanson, who there's no way in hell you're trading him with all that money left in those 5 years. Does that mean Horner's on the way out? Does that mean those two prospects are on the way out in a monster deal for somebody bigger? I don't know, but I think I need to see what else happens, and I need to see Paredes be able to continue to outpace his underlying metrics in a ballpark that is not nearly as conducive to him being able to do that as he's been in Tampa Bay.
Couple things on that front. First, Justin Wilson, who we referenced, is the person who the Cubs acquired in exchange for the third baseman they've acquired the last 2 years, averaged almost 10 walks per 9 innings when he came over to the Cubs that season. That was astounding. He made Tyler Chatwood look like Greg Maddux. Second, I actually am a fan of the Paredes part of the deal, largely for the reasons noted by Evan, in that he can play third base as a league average third baseman. He also has been a plus bat now for 3 years in a row. So I know his exit velocity is low. I don't even remember what Ron Say or Gary Matthews' exit velocity was in 1984. We didn't even know back then. But he puts up, he gets hits, right? And he doesn't strike out as much as a lot of guys do. He gets on base, and he's been, a superb third baseman / hitter, and I am willing at this point to take a chance on somebody who has results versus somebody who has what I keep being told are very promising swings and hard exit velocity, albeit just straight at people over and over and over. So I'm also not quite as worried about the home runs. I think this year, of his 16 home runs, 7 are on the road, 9 are at home. He's going to play half his games on the road anyway. The StatCast numbers don't necessarily take into account wind. So when you hit a dead pull ball to left field at Wrigley, when the winds are blowing like left to right, sometimes those balls are going to move over out of the well a little bit. We'll see. It's hard to say at this point, in terms of that. But I just think he's a good hitter. And I think the Cubs need good hitters and professional hitters. And I like Morel. I always like Christopher Morel, but he didn't really have a position on the field. It really hamstrung them because Suzuki is really, really coming into his own as a DH because he's having such trouble playing right field. And the Cubs just need the versatility and the ability to move people over. And I know I talked about Morel maybe playing second base at one point. And I think that was last week. But I think having a guy who can play third, not that Paredes can't play second, because he did last year a little bit too, right? So he's got a little bit of flexibility. I do think it kind of leads us to what I think has been an inevitable conclusion for a while now, based on who the Cubs have drafted the last couple of years, that Horner is going to be moved at some point. I think that's the ticket there. Unfortunately, the Cubs lacking in star quality hitters and having certain players they can't get, they're stuck with now for a couple of years. I think Horner's got to be the odd man out because he doesn't get on base. He doesn't walk. He's completely batting average reliant. He doesn't hit for power. Hopefully a Matt Shaw can fill that slot and play second. He's a shortstop in college. Hopefully he can play second base in the majors. I think that's probably where they're headed with that. Will they trade Horner by tomorrow? Probably not, given Jed's history. But I think that's probably the smart move in order to maximize a little bit more offense out of the infield to make up for the lack of offense at catcher, center field, depending on who the center fielder is in the future, and just sort of the pretty decent but not great corner bats, right? That they seem to have all over the place. So I'm okay with it. Now, on the downside, is Big E going to turn into the next Josh Hader?
Probably.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is Johnson basically Tom Seaver incarnate? You know he is, right? So I'm sure those two guys were chosen by the Rays for a reason. And I'm sure I almost think at some point that maybe Morel was just subterfuge. Like they said, oh, well, we're going to have to ask for Morel to trick them into giving us the players we really want.
That's what Tampa does. That's what I'm
It
talking about
is,
when I say I'm
exactly.
nervous.
You
Yeah.
know, they're like, oh yeah, we really want Morel, but you got to throw in these other two guys, and they're just laughing all the way to the bank. They're like, oh, Biggie's they have Biggie probably already in pen notched for like 35 saves for next year, and Johnson, is going to be in their rotation 3 years from today. So they always seem to have it figured out. I don't know how they do it, but I think that's where we're at.
The thing with
Again,
Biggie,
trading from position of strength, right? Because the Cubs have a big farm system. So
the thing with Biggie that is, he's one of the few major league arms that I hear about in the farm system, right? Like we got to see some of that on display in the past couple weeks. I hate to see one of their big arms go, because I just don't know who else has the kind of power in the minors for the Cubs.
Yeah, that's kind of the first. And he, to a lot of people, he came out of nowhere, which is, somewhat true. I mean, he's been hurt a lot, so there's been, he hasn't had a chance to really go out and do it. But I mean, we've seen it. Like he's got, like you said, a live arm, and that's one of those things. When you look at that Rays team, I mean, that's one of the things they do really, really well, is identifying pitching talent, at multiple levels, and then finding a way to exploit that, different guys. So, I think that's part of what's tough. And again, you have to give up something to get something. And ideally, what it comes down to is if the Cubs benefit from this and the Rays benefit from this, that's what you want from every trade, right? That'd be great. I do kind of question though, because there is the upside. And maybe the Cubs can go reacquire Biggie then in 5 or 6 years, right? Same deal. Just go get him again once the magic wears off, and then they go.
Or when the Rays have to pay him.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you do. Just get him there. Let him burn through a few years of get into his arbitration, and then get him back. So who knows? But it is, I think regardless of some of the other stuff, and I don't want to say I'm skeptical of it, right? But I'm much more, as I laid out in far too much detail, where my kind of view of this is pretty tempered. I have to say that I'm really excited about the fact that Hoyer went out and made an aggressive move.
He did.
This is a big kind of a trade, right? This isn't the dinky little, like the Nate Pearson thing, right? That we hit on, where it's like, probably inconsequential, maybe slightly positive at best. Like this is one that could have very significant repercussions.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's it's something that we were wondering if Jed was going to do something like that, and getting to seeing this, you just hope this isn't it.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like, we did a move, and that's it. We upgraded a couple of things, and let's run it back in 25, because you hope that I wasn't really positive seeing Tyone get starting tonight's game against Cincinnati. This was something that you figured he would have sat out this game. How surprised were you that did that tell you that the Cubs just weren't hearing the offers that they wanted for Tyone?
Yeah, I think so. But even that, though, I mean, the fact that they had announced him as the Monday starter, over the weekend, I thought was odd, because it had Thursday off. You could have started Steele tonight on Monday night and bumped Tyone to Tuesday. Steele would have been on regular rest. Regardless, and I felt the whole time like it's one of those deals. Again, he's still got 2 years left, based on the whole timeline they're looking at. That's absolutely someone who can help you as you move forward, right, if you're planning to compete next year and the year after, he's at a very reasonable deal still. So, and he's pitching well. So I think it was one of those where they're just saying, hey, we don't want to trade him, but he's out there. And if you guys in the AL East or Houston, all of whom seem to be going in different directions, right? You started seeing some of them pick up some other guys. They were making other trades, and it felt like probably the bidding war was not going to be there for that. So I feel like they just said, you know what, screw it. Like, if you're going to get stupid, make us a great offer that we absolutely can't refuse. Awesome. But I still think starting him on Monday was a bit of a mistake, right? Not that that'll significantly lower any asking prices, but it's like at least wait till Tuesday. And I do kind of wonder, because he had a pretty poor outing in Cincinnati, and I do wonder how much of that was weighing on him.
Sure.
How much of that's mental, and does that get worse on, because if they bump you back to Tuesday, then you know damn well what they're waiting on, right? Now it's really in your head. So I don't know if there was a little bit of back and forth there, but I think it was, again, kind of one of those where they're just saying, we'd rather keep you, all things being equal, but we're going to set the price really high. And if somebody gives us just a sweetheart offer, okay, sorry, we're going to rely on these guys to get healthy, like Ben Brown and Jordan Wicks and all that, and we'll be fine for next year.
So my take on it's a little harsher, I think. Unless the plan is to trade Justin Steele, who's the pitcher tomorrow, which I probably would say is not likely. I would say charitably that this decision was recklessly stubborn, but more likely astoundingly idiotic, because the trade deadline is tomorrow before the game. So there was no reason why they had to pitch Tyon tonight.
Before the game, that's a key point. It is
before the game tomorrow, right? So and Justin Steele could have pitched today on normal rest, and they had minor leaguers ready to go if they needed to. And I just think that his value, well, I predict Tyon's value will never be higher than it was this afternoon for the rest of his Cubs career, based on his age and his performance and a number of other factors, right? So I'm not saying the Cubs should have traded him, but I think, you definitely have to look at that as a possibility. I think that the reason why maybe Jed would not want to trade him is because he either one doesn't want to have to pay another pitcher next year, because he hates signing people to big contracts, like a Corbin Burns or somebody. Or two, he holds out some delusional fantasy that the Cubs are going to make a run here. And if that's the case, then that would be a very poor, unwise thought. Because I think they could have maximized Tyon's value now in ways that they will never be able to again. And I promise you, there'll be a time when we're sitting here on the podcast next year where they should have traded him when they had the chance. I really think that's the case. And I don't want to be, too negative, but gee whiz, like he's literally pitching, at his best.
The run up to this
level.
deadline was a great commercial for what a Tyon could do to your team.
Yeah. And he's, 32 years old now. He'll be 33 in a week, or no, week, in a couple weeks. He'll be 33 going into next season for sure. This is the best season he's ever had. Like, now, seeing what other teams have gotten for some of the players out there, it's been pretty astounding. Like some of the relief pitchers, even, let alone other starting pitchers. It feels like the market for pitching is pretty strong. So if the Cubs don't trade Tyon, will they go ahead and trade Leiter Jr. or Merriweather or somebody else? I don't know. But this whole kind of buy some, sell some stuff, I understand why they bought the players they did, with the longer term implications of having them for a couple more years. But they also need to sell some people, I think, too, because the team they have, I don't think they should fool themselves into thinking that this is, this is going to be a playoff contending team next year, frankly, as it currently stands. And until Jed's and Tom are ready to take a flyer on Juan Soto or somebody, or really start shooting, swinging big, these incremental changes are not going to be helpful.
Evan, do you think, we've talked about, I think the big names that would be your Tyone and potentially a Nico Horner left for the Cubs here. Do you think it's really that next tier down, your Neres, your Smiley, maybe Talkman, Wisdom, are those the guys that are more likely to be traded at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because those guys are all right. They're not going to pull back a huge return on any of them, right? The Cubs need to clear space, if nothing else. Like, none of those guys are making enough money that it's really going to matter that much.
Roster spots.
But I mean, as Pat was saying, I think the relief pitcher market is kind of off the charts right now. So you strike while the iron's hot with that. And again, like, what does it matter if you have Mark Leiter Jr. or not? A guy into whom you've got very little invested, right? Overall, I mean, literally picked him up. I mean, they DFA'd him themselves and then brought him back.
They've cut him multiple times themselves.
Yes. They cut him for Eric Hosmer.
Yeah.
And
magically he stuck back around. Like, I mean, at the risk of really going too far with it, but it's really would be front office malpractice to not move some of these guys. Again, Talkman, same thing. Like, he's great at what he does, but he's not a starting outfielder on that team. But guess what? If a contender wants this on-base guy who can come in and be that fourth or fifth outfielder and DH for him once in a while, the value the Cubs may get back is great. Because again, what is that guy doing other than, if you feel like Owen Casey or Kevin Alcantara or some of these guys are going to be ready next year, then what's the point of having Mike Talkman? There isn't much of one. But I also look at it though, like, what's Nico Horner's value? I mean, he's a Gold Glove second baseman, but like you said, he doesn't hit for power. He's not an on-base guy. So he does, like, Nico Horner would have been a tremendous second baseman in the mid-'80s, right, to the early 90s, before Ryan Sandberg kind of revolutionized things, or even, during some of that time. I mean, he could have been like the dandy little glove man, Mickey Morandini, but like that's not what middle infielders do anymore. Like, these guys need to be able to slug. And so I would trade some of the defensive value for the slug, but what are you going to get out of that outside of maybe the Cubs clearing his salary and getting him out of the way for a Shaw or Triantos or somebody like that? And I hate to say that because I love Horner. I think he's been great. But I don't know. So again, but that's where I go back to, I'll shut up about this too, but I don't think he gets moved to this deadline simply because his value is so low right now. It's almost like one of those things you'd have to kind of work out and figure out, how do we package this together and move it. So yeah, it's going to be the small time guys who they just kind of shift out of there to make space and bring some younger players up.
I mean, the Mike Talkman thing is a no-brainer. He's a 33-year-old fourth outfielder on a team that already has 4 outfielders. Last I checked, assuming Cody Bellinger ever comes back, right? So yeah, he is of no value to the Cubs, really. But these dum-dums just rolled out Drew Smiley in the 8th inning, down 7 runs. So who knows, right? I mean, talk about malpractice. There's a guy who you should be desperately trying to trade right now.
Yes, he should be in bubble wrap, and you're trying to trade him desperately.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, they're just jackasses at this point, right? For doing this, I don't even know what to say.
Is there time?
Pitch the guy the day before the trade deadline, right, down 7 runs in the 8th inning of a game. When
you could burn somebody else, right? Anybody
else.
But is there? And I'm sure there are other teams that do this. We just don't follow them as closely. But I was thinking about this. When you look at, and again, some of these guys, because they're blocked by whomever. But the other than Michael Bush, the Michael Bush trade stands out as a really good one to me, where they hit at the right time. I found a guy who was blocked somewhere else. He came up. Yep. It made sense. But the Cubs have this uncanny ability to wait way too long. Like, if you were going to part with a guy, you could have, like Kyle Schwarber, could have traded him when his value was sky high. Instead, you hold on to him to the point where then you just non-tender him and lose him for nothing. They got decent returns for some of the big time guys they traded, but like, as much as it hurts, it's like they hold and hold and hold, and then you just wait till the value plummets, and now you can't get anything for these guys. Yeah, like, you just let them walk, or they'll set the price so high, tie on, that, okay, well, and again, it's a little bit different because maybe that, but yeah, like you said, I don't know. Do we see him continue to have that run like he did for most of the first half of the season? And
never
yeah.
in the rest of his career, because he's never done it before and he's old. He's not going to do it again.
Yeah. And that's where it's like, why start him on Monday? That's the part. Even if you didn't want to trade him, it just strategically makes absolutely no sense to me. And so I don't, that's the part I don't understand. If you're going to do it, do it. But I feel like Hoyer also has this, he does a great job of it because you don't know what he's doing. Like there's no reports about Morel and then it happens.
Yeah.
But it's like I feel like he puts so much value in, and we've talked a lot about the intelligent spending. It's not just the value of the deal that he gets, but I do think that whether it is paying somebody on a long-term contract or extracting what he feels like he must get in a given trade, it makes it very, very trades are by their very nature, they're very difficult to bring together. So I understand that. But it's almost like one of those things where a lot of what probably should happen goes undone because it doesn't meet the exact criteria that he's got on his checklist. And that's where I was a little bit surprised by the Paredes move, because it did feel aggressive. There's not enough of that. I think they need to be much more aggressive in doing some of these deals and being willing to possibly get burned on some of them because you got aggressive, not because you were so passive that now you're like, shit, well, we can't get anything for him now. Like this guy's broken.
And they don't have a plan B when things go sideways, right? Like that's what we saw last year with Ian Happ and Wilson Contreras, especially Wilson, right? They had a deal, they thought they had their price and they were all in, and then they ran out of time to try to put together a plan B when it went sideways. And waiting until the kudos to them for not waiting until the deadline to make this deal and actually going out ahead of Tuesday to make the trade. But when it comes to selling these assets, it's tough to it's tough to go all the way to the deadline and hope that they get the price that they have in their head. I'm just not confident with the track record we've seen in past deadlines.
And when you wait, like Evan said, to the last minute, as we saw in 2021, and trade 6 players from your core at the time, frankly, we could talk about, and I'm sure we'll do a podcast a year from now on the return from those trades. They got a lot of guys back in those trades. They traded a lot of guys that year, from Chafin and Tapara to, you name it, like Peterson and Baez and Bryan and Rizzo and Kimbrel and, you name it. Trevor Williams. The return on, they got like 2 guys left from those two. I mean, it's whittling its way down here, and that does tend to happen. But they traded those guys like as rentals, as 2-month rentals, right? They weren't able to make the decision to go all in the winter before. They kind of went half in, half out. They got rid of Darvish and they got rid of Schwarber. Got nothing back for either one of them, and then they kept everybody else, which is kind of a 1 foot in, 1 foot out kind of strategy. And I feel like, they're sort of in that position now, and it just doesn't work. I got to think, as much as Nico Horner has his flaws, there's got to be some team out there, like maybe the Braves. Somebody's got to have an injured second baseman that they need. I mean, he does have, and he can play some shortstop too. Like he could, I think, provide value to a playoff team. It just may not be, the return on it might not be commensurate with how Cubs fans view his worth, but realistically, for the reasons we stated, his worth may not be quite as as grand as we sort of hope for, think of. You fall in love with your own players. What can I say? But I still think there would be some takers for him if they wanted to make that move now. And there are some people
controlled. He's cost controlled too.
Yeah, he's cost controlled. And there are people who need help now, right? With 2 months to go. So there's more pressure than, say, in the off season to upgrade. You lose your second baseman for the year. You got to do something, right?
Pat and I were talking over the weekend about how we're rooting for Patrick Wisdom to find a home in this trade deadline. You'd like to see a guy who was here through the darkest of times here in this retool rebuild, Even if you give him away for nothing, get him.
Yeah, which you will, because no one is going to give you anything for him. But just
No, but
let
to
him go to a
have him
contender and pinch hit.
pinch hit,
Yeah.
be a
in the
bat off the
playoffs.
bench. Yeah.
Well,
As a
I was
thank
right
you.
about that. I was amazed that he didn't get moved last year.
Yeah,
Because if you looked
Right.
at who was available and the Padres were trying to buy and they were way down in the power department. And there are, when you look at what Wisdom does, he does one thing really well, and that's hit for power. Right. I mean, he's a solid base runner, things like that. Like if you're a team that has that one small need, you have to have a boost in power. And he's done really well as a pinch hitter. Right. Like he does the thing. He is that guy. You know how the Cubs used to go out and always sign a speedster late in the season, especially like at the waiver trade deadline when we still had that. And they'd always be adding that guy who was just going to come in and pinch run in the ninth inning or tag up from third, if they could do something like that. Wisdom makes a whole lot of sense, even if, like you said, a team's only maybe going to give up a lottery ticket, kind of a flyer prospect, or, maybe a back end or a middle bullpen guy or whatever, right, that's expendable to them. But he does deserve to at least be able to, the last couple of games, right, he's blasting pinch hit grand slams and hitting homers for a team that it doesn't matter. But, like, what a great advertisement. That's the right time to get hot, start hitting homers. Maybe you can actually get something. And I do think, though, he's like that guy. He's the exact kind of small pickup that a contending team should want. Hey, we lack right-handed power? Cool. There's a cheap way to go find it because this dude isn't making much money at all. And yeah, we can add him for nothing. So would love to see him.
It would be a sign of good faith for him having to come in and replace Chris Bryant the way he did, and the fact that he has performed so admirably for the team. The Cubs aren't using him. He's only batted like 14 times the whole month of July and 26 times last month. I just think it'd be a good gesture. And honestly, the Cubs need to clear space. They have too many guys on their roster who aren't going to be here next year. The Mastrobonis and the Madrigals and the Wisdoms and guys like that, get them out and bring in somebody who might have a future with this team. Bring in, whether Canario, although I think he might have gotten hurt, but there's got to be some other way to approach the last 2 months rather than give at bats to 30-something-year-old veterans. Sorry, who are not exceptional players.
Right, and now that they have traded for the guy who is ostensibly their third baseman for the next 3 years.
Yep.
And it was one thing when it was like, hey, we're going to roll with Morel, but
we need somebody else just in case, right?
Yeah, we got to keep all these guys here, but you've got Masterboni, like you said, Masterboni and Madrigal and Wisdom and Morel, and like all these guys that are kind of limited in where they can actually play because of all this. Like, how can you roster all these dudes? Like,
and you're clogging your 40-man roster too, frankly, with these guys.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. So whether that's a trade or like at some point, like I'm just shocked by the fact that Nick Madrigal is still in the organization.
Yes.
Like for various reasons, right? I mean, he can't stay healthy, and when he is not, the one tool he has, right, is the hit tool, and that hasn't been there at all. The base running's terrible.
Zero tool player. Yes.
Yeah, it's so frustrating, and it's like, why? What is the point here? Like, if nothing else, cut bait and let him go find another opportunity. Maybe the change of scenery will at least be there. But what are they doing? I don't, again, Miles Masterboni, like, this dude's not going to play again. Why is he around? Like, let him go find another opportunity somewhere at the very least. So, yeah, I'm hoping for the best for Wisdom, though.
And it concerns me that in a season like this season, the only rookie or quasi-rookie players have gotten any playing time as position players for the Cubs are Bush, right? Who was in his second season but only batted like 81 times before, Amaya, and Pete Crow Armstrong, right? Like, they've got this great farm system and guys are bubbling up and supposed to be ready to go, and yet they're so pained to just give somebody a shot. Canario comes up, they're like, okay, well, that's great, but you're not going to play. I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of counterproductive. There just isn't that. Instead, we've got Bodie. I like Bodie, right? But Bodie and the Gomeses of the world and the Nitos of the world and the Wisdoms of the world and the Madrigals and the Master Bonies and the Talkmans, all guys in their 30s, except for Madrigal, of course. But guys who are just filling up space and taking at bats away from younger players. So it makes you wonder, well, maybe they don't have younger players who they have any confidence in. Remember when they brought up Luis Vasquez, the middle infielder, because they had injuries to Horner and Swanson? He had 2 at bats. In how long was he there?
Learned
for?
nothing.
10 days.
Right.
Yeah. Like, what's the point?
Right.
What is the point?
Well, then they brought him into St. Pete because I think that was when Horner, when he had the hand fracture, and everybody thought, oh, okay, well, it probably means he had his Instagram post. He's like there on the beach in St. Petersburg. It's like, oh, okay, Horner must be going to the IL. Nope, we're just gonna have him play through a broken hand, and we've got this kid down here sorry, we'll just bring him along just in case. We're just gonna let him play through this, no big deal. Go on back down. But they've done a tremendous job of calling up young guys and then not playing them at all.
No.
I fact checked myself. Vasquez had 1 at bat, not 2. Sorry.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. I mean,
that's right.
I mean,
like, what's the point? Like, why not just call up if you're gonna? Why waste that time when he's a young guy and he could have been getting every day at bats down there? And I get some of that's kind of, hey, come on up. It's a reward. This is cool. You get to see what it's like, major league lifestyle. You get a big paycheck. So I can appreciate that. They're like, hey, an MLB paycheck is pretty significant for some of these dudes, especially if they didn't, if they weren't bonus babies in the draft. But there is something, speaking of timing with the trades, it's like the Cubs either go too early or too late. And there's a certain point at which you miss a window. There's a lot of these teams like, look at what the Angels, the Angels suck. So it's not as if we're looking at them going like, yeah, they've been really good. But they brought a bunch of dudes up. Like, they were one of the first teams to call up some of their guys that they drafted. They were willing to move them through the system. Part of that's because they didn't have much other talent, and they probably wanted to get reasons for people to come to the ballpark. But at some point, like, look at Moises Ballesteros, and everybody's like, well, how's he catching? I don't care how he's catching. The dude is raking at AAA. Like, that would be so fun. Let him DH. Who cares if he can catch? And if he can't catch very well, what is that? Miguel Amaya has made some kind of goofball mistakes back there and hasn't even hit his weight for most of the season. Tomas Nido, you kidding me? You're bringing up Christian Bethancourt? Like, why? If you got to add that dude to the 40-man roster, why not at least bring up one of your rookies that's hitting like crazy, that's doing things most guys his age never do? I feel like the Cubs are just going to sit there and continue to screw around with this, end up moving this guy in a trade, and he's going to be some kind of a Jose Altuve, short, stocky, just hitterish dude who lasts in the league for 15 years. And we're going like, why the hell wasn't that guy in Chicago? Oh, yeah, they didn't want to call him up.
You run into the risk of waiting too long on prospects. Like, if you're going to trade a prospect, you want to trade them when their prospect value is high as well, like in the minors. You don't want to wait till they've had a couple failed seasons at AA or AAA and then try to trade them, right? So there's an art to that as well as much as anything.
Well, looking at the standings, reminding everyone that the Cubs are not going for it. Should not be going for it.
The Cubs are 2/3 of the way through the season as we currently sit here right now, Jeremy, at 51 and 57.
That is correct. 51 and 57, 4 and 6 over their last 10.
In order to get the last wild card, they probably realistically would have to go at least 34 and 20 for the last third of the year.
And they have to jump 6 teams. There are 6 teams in front of them currently. So they can get as hot as they want to, but all these other teams also can't. That's
right.
And you don't have any of the tiebreakers against any of those teams as well.
Not a single one. In fact, they're 2 and 6, I think, against the Reds now. They could, depending on how the next couple of days go, they could pretty much kiss that one goodbye too.
So let's look ahead to the week that will be the toughest week to predict, because you don't know who's going to be on the team. You don't know who's going to be on the teams they're playing. But they've got 2 games left against Cincinnati after getting rocked 7-1 on the Monday night. 2 games against Cincinnati, followed by 4 at home against the Cardinals. They'll finish that homestand with 3 more against the Minnesota Twins before getting a break playing at the White Sox. So over the next week here, we've got 2 games left against Cincinnati, 4 against St. Louis. Pat, we'll start with you. Over the next 6 games, what are you thinking?
Well, for the 7-game week, I am going to say I'm going to give you a prediction of 3-4 for the Cubs.
3-4 sounds fair.
Yeah.
Evan,
they're
what do you
0-1, so
they're 0-1 so far.
3-3 the rest of the way.
Can they go 3-3 the rest of the week?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm going that they're 2-4 the rest of the way. So I think it's 2-5 on the week.
I will say this: they have to sweep the Reds this week, or else they officially lose the tiebreaker for the season. They have to win the next 2 against the Reds.
I feel a 2-5 week. I'm going to second this for Evan. Pat, you're the optimistic one of the week.
Yeah, they'll be at home against the Cardinals, and the Cardinals are buying players right now. A lot of other teams are buying players right now. So
the Cardinals only have to jump 2 teams to make the 3rd wild card spot. Again, when we talk about jumping teams, we're also talking about jumping teams to get into the final 3rd wild card spot, which is something that didn't exist just a couple years ago here. So, all right. With that, we are going to head into one of our favorite segments here. Every single week, we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the 1984 Chicago Cubs. So Pat takes us into, we parachute into 1984. Tell us about what your Chicago Cubs were doing this week in 1984.
Well, our Chicago Cubs were on a 7-game East Coast road trip. 3 against the Phillies, 4 against the Mets, the first place Mets. The Cubs won 2 out of 3 against Philadelphia. Rick Sutcliffe had another great, outstanding performance.
He's been on fire.
He's been on fire. Got the win. And then the Cubs went to New York after winning those 2 out of 3 and took on the first place Mets. Cubs lost the first game 2-1 because this guy, Dwight Gooden, pitched really well. And Dick Ruthven pitched well for the Cubs too, in fairness. But it's a 2-1 loss. The Cubs fell 4.5 games back to the Mets. So if you want to look at some hope for how you can be 4.5 back and then turn things around, just look back to 1984. This is what the Cubs need to start doing, right? They lost the first game. Second game, it's 3-3 going into the 8th inning. The Cubs really needed to win this game, right? They want to fall 5.5 back. And Ryan Sandberg leads off with a walk. And it's the first of 12 batters to come to the plate that inning, where the Cubs end up putting 8 runs on the board. They win the game 11-4, and they even up the series with the Mets to get to 3.5 back. That Sunday, they played a doubleheader because, as you may recall, early in the season they had been rained out from a game at Shea, back when they were having all those rainouts. Back in these days, a doubleheader meant you would play a game, and then you would wait 30 minutes from the conclusion of that game, and you would start the next game, right? Same fans, same things. It was great. So you'd play at noon and 3 typically, or 3:15, depending on how late the first game went. This might have been and this is against a first-place team that had a lot of talent offensively. This Cubs team had one of the best pitching doubleheaders I can recall. Maybe there's been a better one since, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. So in the first game of the doubleheader, Steve Trout pitched a 9-inning complete game shutout.
Wow.
A manager's delight, right? You're playing a doubleheader and your starting pitcher just threw a shutout in game 1. You're like, oh, thank God, right? Cubs won 3-0. They're only 2.5 back. They're on a roll. Unfortunately for the Cubs, they were not able to exploit all those fresh relief pitchers in game 2 because Scott Sanderson pitched 7 2/3 innings and only gave up 1 run. They went straight to Lee Smith, who got the last 4 outs. And the Cubs won the game 5-1 behind home runs. Sandberg's 14th homer of the year, and Jody Davis hit his 15th of the year. So in the course of one day, the Cubs starting pitchers went 16 2/3 innings, giving up only 1 run. That's pretty good, I think, for a doubleheader. I'm trying to think of a better one they've had since, but that's right up there with any of them. So the Cubs came back to Chicago only a game and a half behind the Mets. They were definitely making up ground. It was a big series. It kind of put the Cubs in a unique position because they only had forward momentum after that. And I don't want to give everything away, but let's put it this way. They never were more than a game and a half back the rest of the season. Like this was
huge
they
series.
they'd fallen to 4.5 back. They worked their way up to a game and a half back, and they kept on going. And next week we get into some of the good stuff. So some of the fun memories. No trade deadline concerns at that time.
Excellent. Always great to check in with 1984. And with that, we are going to wrap up this week's podcast. Evan, always a pleasure catching up with you. Time flies when we're talking Cubs, as always. Can you remind...
Jeremy, can I ask one last question real quick?
Yeah.
Over under on Cubs traded between now and the end of the deadline. If I set it at 2.5, would you say over or under?
I'll take the over.
I'm gonna take the over. I think they have to at least trade 3 guys.
I'm going to take the under. I think Jed was really buoyed by the Cubs only losing by 6 runs today and thinks that they're about to make a run.
He's about to make it. There you go. Well, if anything crazy happens, we will parachute in for another emergency podcast. But don't anticipate that happening. Evan, if anything does happen, though, we want them to go to your website. Remind all of our listeners where they can find your tremendous work on the internet.
Yeah, well, I don't. That place doesn't exist, but they can find my subpar mediocre work over at CubsInsider.com or, over on X at Real Cubs Insider or Facebook and just search Cubs Insider. But again, as always, I recommend not going there. You do not want to deal with the comments. So just go straight to the site and avoid any of that mess.
That's right. We love CubsInsider.com, one of our favorite sites. And Evan, one of our favorite people. Thanks for coming on again. And with that, you can also follow us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat for Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter, X, everywhere. Facebook.com/Wrigleyville Nation as well. And of course, YouTube, we need your help. We're almost to 100 subscribers on our YouTube channel that we launched this season. So we want to get those subscriber numbers over 100. So if you have not gone to our YouTube channel, search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast over at YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show, and you can watch the video version of this podcast as well. And make sure you stay subscribed on all of the podcasting platforms so you don't miss a single episode in case we need to do special bonus episodes because of trade deadline craziness. Make sure you're staying subscribed to the podcast. Tell your Cub fan friends about the show. And with that, we're going to wrap it up again. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Have a good night, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.